The UK suffered its third terror attack of 2017 this weekend, tragically. This time, 3 attackers targeted civilians in the area immediately surrounding the London Bridge. As of today, 7 have already died and nearly 50 are wounded. I believe the majority of them in critical condition right now in London area hospitals. We have a little graphic we're gonna show you. There's a lot of information that's been released about exactly what happened. Effectively, they used a van as a weapon initially on the London Bridge before getting off on foot and attacking people in a crowded market area, an area rife with bars and restaurants and that sort of thing, a civilian heavy area. However, many emergency calls were put in, I believe over 100 in the first moment or two of the attack. And then within the first 8 minutes of that call, the 3 attackers were shot dead. More information is coming out about the attackers. We're gonna talk a little bit about that, including their country of origin, because there are some narratives at stake here, I suppose. In terms of exactly who they are, I don't care about that. They're assholes who got what they deserved for an absolutely terrible attack. And especially considering that the Manchester attack just happened, that even that wasn't the first attack in the UK. That's very rough. And the people of London are showing, incredible resilience, durability in the wake of it, as John Oliver described very well in his program this weekend. But I mean, that's an incredibly rough situation to be in, to know that this sort of thing is now happening with more regularity in that country.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to be the place that they have said that they were going to put down roots a while ago, going back to when the United Kingdom backed George W. Bush. There's a history to why they did it, why 7/7 happened, and why people were outraged that there was support from Tony Blair for George W. Bush. And that hasn't seemed to dissipate. And the way that they've treated that community, many people say is not right in the United Kingdom. I don't know well enough to say that that's true or not, but it certainly has been a flashpoint, a focal location for these people to do these things. And I don't, the problem with this stuff is you don't know the victories, right? You don't know that it's like anything in intelligence. You don't know what's going really well. You just know when it went really poorly. And this seemed like such a, a haphazard. When we look at all of them, none of them are terribly professional, but some of them, they all do terrible things, and they have terrible results. But this seemed more haphazard even.
Right, and look, anytime a situation like this comes up, the question of balancing, civil liberties with national security is a topic that should be discussed. And one thing to keep in mind is that, Britain is very different from the United States. Well, in theory, it's very different than the United States when it comes to certain privacy issues, right? So the government there is very open and honest about the fact that they collect data on everyone. There are cameras everywhere filming every single move that every person makes in the public. And so right now, what I think the most
They also call sweaters jumpers.
They do. Yeah. They do call sweaters jumpers. Some jumpers, completely different thing here in the US. But I think what's important is to kind of, and I know it's difficult, avoid all the different players that are trying to exploit this tragedy for political reasons and start thinking about real solutions, because this is something that keeps happening over and over again. Yeah. There was the bomb in Manchester just 2 weeks ago, and obviously what world leaders are doing right now isn't working. And it's not a question of political correctness. Being less politically correct isn't gonna miraculously stop ISIS and all of these terrible people from doing what they're doing. We need real solutions. Yeah. And unfortunately, all of this data that officials have and all of this spying that officials do, it's still not solving the problem. So what do we do? What more can we do? Also, just one quick point on that. Authorities have released the identities of 2 of the assailants. Now, all 3 of them have been killed. I'm not gonna name the person, but there's one of them who's 27 years old. He was a British citizen who was originally born in Pakistan, but he was on everyone's radar. In fact, he was on an episode of Jihadis Next Door, which is a show that talks about—
Which one? Which episode was that?
Which talks about extremists and some of their ideology, and it's just amazing because officials had been investigating him, and then they just dropped the investigation.
Yeah, but you can believe that a person believes radical things. You can't simply just lock up everyone, of course.
Right, well,
and there's always gonna be tons of people that theoretically could commit an attack, but.
Right, look, I'm not saying that you just lock them up without evidence.
No, I'm not saying you are, but I'm saying it's tough. Even if you have reason to be suspicious of them, that's.
But right now, I don't know why they decided to drop the investigation, right? And so instead of collecting all this data on all these innocent people, I feel like the resources should be focused more on individuals that you know are extremists. And of course, don't put them in prison right away without convicting them of anything, but keep your eye on them. You know, right now, British officials have at least 500 different cases open in regard to extremists and possible terror plots.
Well, but that speaks to the fact that you were talking about and just to go back to what I was saying earlier, you're talking about how whatever they're doing isn't working. Actually, it might be. Like they might be 99% effective, and then somebody like this slips through. It's when they slip through and it doesn't work, and there's an incident. It's so tragic. It's so awful. But it might also just be that this is the most successful anti-terrorist group. We just don't know. Like to hear 500 people, that means the 500 first got through.
500 individual cases that involve many people.
Right. So that's what I'm saying. 500 individual cases that are not coming to fruition, and one did here, and 7 people died actually, and so I don't know. It may just be.
There was another one 2 weeks ago.
No, but what I'm saying is they may be unbelievably effective, and it sounds horrible to say that. We just don't know what is going well, and so that makes it even more complex.
Right.
Because that is when the politics come into it, and people start using it and grandstanding and all of that. They can't even say, and that's just a huge frustration.
Yeah, and like you said, I mean, we don't necessarily hear about the victories. I mean, we hear about some of the victories, and I think that here at TYT we try to spotlight when they have successfully shut down these cells, and that's not just in the UK. That happens in the US. I mean, we had that big 9-state network of white supremacists who wanted to start a race war by burning down a bunch of churches. I mean, that was shut down. It didn't happen. But then there's the other layer of victories, as you're saying, that we will of course never hear about because it's incredibly sensitive. They need to maintain blah blah sources, all that.
The sources, the people that are providing this, and the gathering of those sources is so dangerous too. So.
Yes, and we need to maintain the security and privacy of those until Trump tweets about it or whispers it to a diplomat. But yeah, and in terms of if they're collecting nuclear material to make a dirty bomb, you really hope that intelligence. I mean, it seems like that's something that you should be able to stop. But if somebody wants to get in their car and run off the road into a crowd of people in a city of millions upon millions of people, you can have the most effective crime-fighting organization in the world, and I don't think you will ever be able to stop all of those, and that's a tragedy. And you're not supposed to say that. You're supposed to say we're going to keep everyone safe in all cases. But I don't think that that's actually true. I don't think that that's actually achievable, and that's not to say anything about particular cases.
Counterterrorism, in my opinion, has to do with so many different factors. It's not just surveillance. It's not just intelligence gathering. It's also foreign policy decisions that are being made.
I agree.
The type of rhetoric that's being used by government officials. Now, understand when I say rhetoric, I'm not saying every politician should go out there in public and talk about how amazing this group of people are. Of course, I'm not saying that. However, I think it's important to make sure that you make it extremely difficult for a terrorist organization like ISIS to recruit people, right? And so it's very easy to recruit people when Western governments are killing innocent civilians in Middle Eastern countries, right? And just think about it in your context, right? And for 1 second, even if you're the most extreme when it comes to this issue, put yourself in anyone's position, put yourself in these people's positions where you're living in a Middle Eastern country and a drone strike wipes out your entire family. How incredibly easy would it be for you to want vengeance and for you to join a terrorist organization that also wants vengeance against Western countries? I'm just saying that as part of a comprehensive counterterrorism strategy that I think needs to be implemented, and unfortunately we're missing the mark because we're allowing our emotions to get in the way.
Well, and that's what I'm saying. I'm saying if you are going to be doing all that stuff, running around the world and stoking the flames of extremism, then you can't expect that regardless of how much information you give, how many cops are on the streets, you will not be able to stop all the attacks.
You're not gonna, right, but if you stopped doing that entirely, which is not gonna happen, I think that this is a generational thing too. I think these are young men who came of age at a time where countries were being wiped out by war, and
that's all they've ever known.
And that's all they've ever known. And there's this and there's not a tremendous amount of education. Where there is education, it's education in many ways coming from people who are preaching exactly what they want to hear. So it's and so I think it's a generational thing. I think it was just like with the Irish Republican Army. I think it is just like it was in South America for some with and Italy even. I mean, there are generations where this happens and people come up, and Israel and Palestine are similar. So I don't know that anything, I mean, this sounds terrible, but I don't know that anything's effective. I don't think rhetoric, I don't think changing practices, I really don't think.
Well, what does effective mean? I mean, cutting down some percentage if
certainly,
it stops.
Yeah, but I don't think rhetoric is going to change any minds.
You know what's not going to change anything? The shit that we've been doing so far. That's not going to change anything.
Right, but it's not going to change the desire. What I'm saying is, I don't know that we're doing a terrible job, and it sounds horrible because this keeps happening. I don't know that the people that are fighting this are doing a terrible job, because that it doesn't happen every day in a weird way.
There you're talking about like investigators, police, FBI, those sorts of things.
Right, and the policies that support them as well, and intelligence sharing among nations. And
you're not talking about militaries abroad and that sort of thing.
No, of course not.
Just to be clear.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for clarifying. And not at all. And militaries abroad, I mean, listen, we've gotten used to being a nation that has military abroad everywhere, and that was a post-war thing, and it's probably time to revisit that. But that's not even so easily done because a lot of the countries want us, and it employs a lot of people and a lot of.
It employs a lot of people. That is
definitely the case.
Part of it.
Yeah, we saw that in the recent trip to Saudi Arabia.
But a lot of countries want it too, though. I mean, a lot of these countries want that as well. So it becomes a difficult. But employing a lot of people is important too. I mean, I don't think that's I'm not talking about employing the infrastructure of the people that make weapons great. I'm talking about the military the Department of Defense is a huge employer in our country, for better or worse.
I think that's actually incredibly problematic. I think that's the main reason why we keep, pushing for foreign policy that fails time and time again. When I say fails time and time again, I'm saying, amplifying wars in countries that lead to more hostility toward the United States, lead to more hostility toward the Western world. And by the way, I know that there are people who disagree deeply on this issue, right? But if I'm wrong, please give me a solution. Please provide a solution other than what we've been doing so far.
Clay Higgins has a solution later on the show, don't worry.
Right, we'll get to that later.
Well, it's a defense department, not an offense department. So if people think of it that way, that would be better.
Yeah.
You just watched the video from the Young Turks. Did you know that there's a live 2-hour show every day, and that if you're a member of the Young Turks, you can get that on demand anytime you want without ads? Plus the post game just for members, plus Aggressive Progressives, plus Old School, plus so many other network shows. Go right now, tytnetwork.com/join.